Welcome to Marlowe House Presents. I'm Andrew Marlowe.
I'm Monica Marlowe.
And tonight we're talking horror with Sean K. Reynolds. Welcome back to the show, Sean.
Hello,
Thank
Sean.
you.
We're not just talking horror, we're also talking consent and horror, which are two very important things when you do horror to talk about together.
Yes. They are a good pairing of elements.
Yes. So, Sean, why don't you tell us a little bit about your two new books-ish. One's really a PDF, but it's a book. Or you can say hi, or you can do whatever you want.
So, hi, I'm Sean Reynolds. I'm a designer and developer at Monte Cook Games. I've worked on Pathfinder and D&D and a bunch of other things. If you didn't already know that, stumbling into this chat. Last week or so, the revised version of the Cypher System rulebook came out, which is something that Bruce and I spearheaded earlier in the year. And I just finished writing a Cypher System book on horror called Stay Alive.
Ooh.
And there was a lot of talk a couple of weeks ago because MCG released a consent in gaming PDF. It shocked a lot of people, but also made a lot of people happy. And that PDF's existence actually originally stemmed from the consent chapter in Stay Alive. And when Monty took a look at it doing his creative director pass, he said, you know, there's a lot of really good content here that is applicable to more than just horror. How about we take all that content, make it a separate PDF, release that for free, and then the section in the Stay Alive book can just focus on consent and horror. And that's what we did. And blew up all over the internet. Now people are all filling out the checklist like that.
So I'm really excited that you ended up publishing that, because consent's been something that I've felt was very important, especially from the way the direction that I approach gaming, because unfortunately it's pretty common knowledge that people who are marginalized in any way tend to be subjected to things that the average white dude gamer would not experience and stuff like that. So I was glad to see that there was a book out there that caused so many people to be uncomfortable, because that means that they're now aware of it in a way that they have to kind of, like, it's getting harder and harder to keep your eyes closed and not really pay attention. I hate to say that I think that sometimes negative attention is better than no attention at all, but it means that people are seeing it. If that had been released and there had been no reaction, I would have said, well, obviously we've made it to the part in the world where everybody's cool. Everything's great. This book was unnecessary.
Yeah, I think the impact of the Consent in Gaming PDF was people who wanted to have more like this in the gaming space were very happy to finally get another tool along with the X card and lines and veils. People who would never want to use something like this very much outed themselves as people who don't respect the consent of others, and that made everybody who is concerned about consent realize, hey, there's a whole faction group of people that I don't want to game with, and they just identify themselves.
Right.
But I think the first or second most important group is the third group, which is people who didn't really realize that they had a voice. They have the option of saying, hey, you know what? I don't want this in this game. I have the right to say I don't want to have this in the game that I'm playing in, and I have the right to walk away from a game that features these things because the other players or the GM won't respect the fact that I don't want this. And so that empowerment, I think, is, if not as important as the first group, which is people saying, yes, we want more tools like this, just telling new people that it's okay to walk away from a game that you think is bad. Mm-hmm. It's totally all right.
Well, and there are people, too, who might not have had... who might not have thought that they needed it, but are glad to see it out there. I would have actually been in that category if it hadn't been for this last year of gaming, where we have had a number of things come up at the table that, fortunately, we have a very mature group that was able to say, "Hey, hold on a second," and basically do the we didn't have X cards at the table, but essentially the X card thing, and say, "Hey, maybe not," and we were able to stop and take a look at it. But it is nice to have those tools going into a game for the future. And in some of the cases, we wouldn't have necessarily known that they were going to be problematic.
Mm-hmm. Well, and just really, really briefly, I did write a blog about my own situation where I've had a lot of family deaths in the last year, and Andrew's PC died in game, and we knew he was going to come back. We knew he was going to be resurrected, but we were actually going to game one night without him here because he had to work, and it was more than I couldn't handle it. I had a panic attack. I really didn't manage it emotionally very well. And I was lucky that, the other members of our gaming group were like, hey, you know what? Maybe this isn't the day to game. We'll just leave it. Because even though he was going to come home from work, he had left to go to work in the morning, but it was just such an emotionally raw situation for me that I couldn't even accept pretending that he was dead, even for just like 4 hours. Like, it was
Sure.
more than I could handle. And that's the other thing about consent, and what you focus on is that just because I gave consent to do something like this last week doesn't mean that there hasn't been something significant that's happened this week that I have changed my mind. And it doesn't matter why I've changed my mind. I am just like, people change their minds on things all the time.
Yep.
Sometimes because they've thought better about what it was that they were experiencing, and they were like, not so much now. Or maybe I am willing to do it now. Maybe I've thought about what it is that I'm processing, and I'm okay with that. So consent, the idea that consent can be given and withdrawn without much notice is also important. And I think you're right.
I think that was a really nice. That was a nice addition because I wrote like the first half, but then we got Shauna to write what was basically the second half, and then we had a couple of sensitivity readers. One was our friend Jess, and the other one is Darcy, who took a look at it and said, hey, because Darcy and Jess have just so much more familiarity with safety tools than I do. But they were able to go and like help us refine a few parts. But I think just relating to that is on the consent checklist, the very last page, it was originally just an opt-in, opt-out. Then we kind of reached its current form, which is, no, we've got a green, I'm all in on this is fine. We've got a red, no, I don't ever want this. And then a yellow of, maybe on a case-by-case basis, please check in on that topic. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a nice way of having a middle ground between, sure, murder all the pets you want in this game, and no thank you, never murder any pets. In the middle would be like, well, if it's a really big, mean, angry dog, I'd be okay with that, but not if it's like a pet possum.
Right.
Well, and that's something to review on a regular basis too, as I think the thing that the PDF brings to the forefront is just how imperative it is to have an open line of communication between players and the GM all around the table. And I think that's has been my singularly most important thing that I've always landed on, is that if I can't talk to you about it, how are we supposed to game about this topic in a make-believe fashion when we can't even talk about it in real life?
Yeah.
Because that's... So, you wrote this for the Stay Alive, and did you take in consideration then that PDF when you wrote your horror book?
He said it came from.
Yes,
I know it came from the Stay Alive, but was that also part of some of the stuff you were looking at for your the horror? I forget what it's called. Stay Alive. I'm sorry. I am so sorry. It has been the longest 2 days. I have worked almost 26 hours in the last 2 days. I'm a little tired. Sorry.
So what is your question?
So my question is what were the things that you felt from Stay Alive that really prompted that? Like, what kind of things do you cover in Stay Alive that you felt like you needed to talk about consent? Like, what kind of horror aspects and stuff like that?
So, I mean, as we say in and the CSR, there's a difference between good uncomfortable and bad uncomfortable. Like if you are a person who goes to see horror movies and reads horror books, you're like, okay, yes, I'm buying into this experience. I want to be scared. Or if you go on a roller coaster, you know that's a particular kind of thrill and you want that to happen. Now, if you went on a roller coaster expecting like all these highs and lows and sharp turns, and then it went through a tunnel and there's like these depictions of people being decapitated in the middle of this carnival ride, you'd be like, that's not what I signed up for. I was here for some adrenaline of going up and down this ride, not like realistic depictions of beheadings. That would be upsetting to you. So you were aiming for the good and comfortable of the roller coaster ride. You got hit with the bad and comfortable of, hey, I don't like beheadings, whether they're cartoons or whatever. And so when you're running a horror game and playing a horror game, you need to know where those boundaries are. And it's totally fair for a person to say, yes, I want to be scared in this game, whether that's a modern setting RPG or a fantasy or something like Call of Cthulhu. You can say, there's a certain type of horror I'm comfortable dealing with, but there's other kinds of horror that I don't want to deal with. And like just to use your example, Monica, you could be okay with a one-shot or a short campaign where there are demons or zombies, but if one of the main parts of the plot is, oh, one of your relatives is, killed by this pack of monsters, that'd be very upsetting to you. And so you could say, I'm all in on demonic violence and zombie violence, but just not against family members. Mm-hmm. And so the GM would just take that into account and say, yes, all the people in this, none of them are related to each other. You might even have an adversarial relationship. So when so-and-so gets torn apart by zombies, you can go, yeah, I never liked that guy.
I got a long list of people to put on that.
About moderating what sort of negative scares that are giving you the positive sort of like, yes, I'm scared and I like this. And part of the Stay Alive book talks about all these different genres and subgenres of horror, because there's ghosts and there's demons and there's cults and there's aliens and there's body horror and there's like creepy kids.
Mm-hmm.
And
creepy kids are the worst.
Like some people are totally fine with having demons, and some people are like, I'm a Christian and I don't like talking about demon stuff, and mm-hmm. Can we just not have it in the game? And there are people who are quite comfortable with all sorts of body horror and people turning into monsters, like The Fly with Jeff Goldblum. And then some people are like, that's pretty disgusting for me and I can't handle that. Can we not have that in the game? Now, of course, the flip side of that is the GM saying, I'm going to run a 3-session game that relies a lot on demons and body horror. And they'll present that information to players, and if this player says, hey, that's not really it for me, the GM can say, I've done all this work, and this is the game I'm planning on running, and I can't really revise it without kind of eating holes in my narrative. How about you sit out these next few sessions? It's totally fine to come from either end. The player could say, I'm not into this, can we change it? The GM can say, I'm not into this, can you skip 2 sessions? Which was one of the things from the Consent in Gaming PDF that a lot of people were saying, I put a lot of work into this campaign. How dare you expect me to change it? It's like, it's okay for a player to go, oh, you're going to have a slavery-based adventure? I'm going to skip the next 2 sessions because I'm very sensitive about that sort of thing. And then they can just come back to the game when it's moved on to a different topic. But the very nature of horror is that you have a lot of disturbing things. You're going to present one or more of those disturbing things in the campaign. You just got to make sure that everybody involved is on board with that. Body horror in particular is one that gets very squicky, and a lot of the example forms of media that use body horror often have like a very violent and sexual element to them, which means that it can easily slip from body horror to something kind of a borderline sexual assault, which is, again, another thing we're like, okay, I'm going to make a very strict line and say that we're going to stay on this side of body horror and never edge over onto this one. That was one of the things, actually, when I was looking at every one of those sections in the book cites a number of possible sources. Like, oh, if you want to have some good examples of ways to freak people out with body horror, watch Hellraiser, watch Videodrome, that sort of thing. But there are a lot of examples where I'm like, this is like this is like too much for me even to like casually throw in as a reference so that someone might read it. And even so, I just left it off the list. But even so, like I put a call out in that section saying, hey, if you go exploring on your own and looking for other body horror inspiration for your game, just be warned, there's a lot of like freaky violence, a lot of fetishized violence, and a lot of sexual assault sort of stuff. So just be forewarned. If you're sensitive to that, be very cautious when doing that sort of search.
So now that we're almost 20 minutes in, we should probably warn all of our viewers who are here tonight that if you had missed that we were going to be talking about horror and the discussion of horror upsets you, this is probably not the show for you. We did cover consent in the first 20 minutes, and we may get into things a little bit more creepier than that as we go in deeper. But, you know, it's funny because I really love the horror genre, but I can only watch horror movies when it's daylight. And usually I watch it with the lights on and the sun coming through the window.
Sure.
I have to confess, though, I went and saw Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark and It Chapter 2 by myself in an empty theater. And when I got into the theater to see it, there was actually another gentleman in there. It was just the two of us. And I was like, so I said, you know what? Scary movies are kind of my thing, but they scare me. I said, please don't do anything to make me more scared. I said, we can have a really good time. You want to laugh, you know, but but he was sitting behind me. I said, please don't mess with me. And he was a really nice guy.
And that's actually another example of how you can have a middle ground in horror. Like you can have a player in your game who is arachnophobic, but they are willing to, and if the GM is like, no, I want to have spiders, like we're going to do a dark elf scenario where you're going into the Underdark and you're fighting drow and there are dryas and spiders. And the player's like, okay, I can handle spiders being in the game. I can handle giant spiders being our opponents. Don't go overboard in describing their like chittery little mandibles and their weird eyes and all their hairs and that sort of thing.
And how it clicks when they move.
Right. And like, an example I listed is, hey, and if you have a pet tarantula, like in a terrarium, that player could say, you know, I think it's nice that you have this pet. Could you put it in another room? Or like whatever you do, don't scare the players by taking your tarantula out and throwing it on the table. That's one of the yellow, like, hold on, let's evaluate how comfortable I am with this thing that I'm willing to engage in for the sake of being scared and having fun.
I think you found one of my lines. I think if somebody threw that actually on the table, I'd be...
So I shared this story last week, but I was at a facility. I go into different facilities, and I found a spider on the floor. And one of the things we look for is pest control. So I captured the spider, and I had to go verify it with one of the facility staff. And it jumped out of the tissue and it started crawling up my arm. And I was so proud of myself because I didn't scream. But everybody else was like, oh my God, oh my God. And it was one of those moments where I was like, well, at least I kept my professional performance on. But you know, really, we have little spiders in our house and they drop down on us from time to time in our gaming table. And it's like, you guys can't stay. You've got to go. There are
for me, I have cats, and so I don't mind spiders in the house, but I know the cats will eat them. So when I see spiders, I'm like, I'm just going to move you outside, because otherwise you can have a horrible death at the paws and teeth of my cat.
Right, and you're always going to have, you know, there are always going to be like spiders and things in the house, but I'm okay with spiders. It's anything else.
Mm-hmm.
But if the rule is if I find you, you have to go. You have to be evicted. Often violently because I don't have the...
So if you're a stealthy spider, you're in good shape.
That's just evolution.
Exactly.
So as long as you stay hidden, you can keep all the other vermin out of my house. Mm-hmm. But if I see you... Yeah, because I'm not 100% arachnophobic, but I'm borderline.
So what kind of things do you look for inspirations for your horror storylines since you've
clearly
told
gone.
a few of them?
I mean, I am what I call an infovore. I just absorb all sorts of, I'll read comics, I'll watch movies, I'll watch TV shows, anything that's just like remotely game worthy gets stuck in a little corner in my head. Like even when I was in college, when I didn't have time to game and I had just kind of given up on having time to game, I found myself thinking, oh, that'd be really cool to put this in a game. Um, there are many examples of media, mostly of movies and TV shows, um, in the book. And again, they're organized by genres. Like, oh, you want some really good examples of ghost movies or ghost stuff? Here's this. Demon stuff here. Cultists, this sort of thing. Um, but I grew up in. I mean, I was born in 1971, and so I was in my early teen formative years during what they called the great peak of the slasher film, when they had all the original Nightmare on Elm Street movies,
Oh yeah.
and the Jason and Michael Myers and all that sort of thing. In my 10th grade English class, I did a media presentation on The Thing.
That's awesome.
The scene with the head spider. I won't give any more spoilers than that. But like that sort of stuff just never bothers me. And I love the aspect of the special effects and watching how people react to it, and just the idea of one of the things that the book talks about is horror as a genre is something that we have on our earth, but a lot of times people will make fun of the stupid things that characters do in a horror movie or in a horror show. And the realization is that, oh, you know what? They probably live in an alternate version of Earth where there aren't horror movies. That's why, like on The Walking Dead, they never call them zombies. Zombie is just not a thing in The Walking Dead. But you can have your typical slashers at a camp getting killed sort of movie and be like, well, I know there's a killer out there hunting us, but honey, you look really cute. We should go make out in this big scary barn. Okay, let's do that. It's because they don't have the background of all these movies and TV shows where we do, where like doing that gets you killed. The horny kids get killed. And there's actually a rules module in the book called Poor Choices, where it just lists a whole bunch of things that basically the GM can use as GM intrusions on you. Be like, oh, you're on watch. Well, GM intrusion. You and your significant other decide to go out to the lake and make out for a while, even though you're supposed to be on watch. Oh, you'll be fine. You can go investigate that scary basement all by yourself. Totally fine. Not a big.
The lights are on now.
Yeah. So, if you decide to use that horror module, the GM should tell you, but like, hey, just we're going to use this horror module. I'm going to throw some GM intrusions of you doing stupid things, because in this genre, people do stupid things because it gets them killed. And there's another horror module called Character Posse, which is you're controlling more than one character and you're not really sure which one is your main character, because you could have like the kids getting killed at the camp, and then you can have a group of people over at the sheriff's office and they're like, we just got a call, there's some sort of axe killer at the camp. These damn prank calls. And then if your character over in the campsite gets killed, then you might be like, maybe that wasn't a prank call. I'm going to send that deputy out there. So the person whose character got killed at the camp sends out a deputy, Or maybe that character whose character got killed just got lost in the woods. The deputy shows up, and then the deputy gets killed. And so it just kind of keeps you on your toes of which is my character, who's going to survive. There's also a last survivor mechanic where it's kind of like the reverse of a hot potato, in that there's a token representing the last survivor on the table. And normally in Cypher System, when you have a GM intrusion, you give 2 XP to one character or to one player, and that one player immediately gives one of those XP to somebody else. When you're playing Last Survivor, you give that second XP always goes to the designated, or to the Last Survivor token.
Oh, so they get a potload of XP when the last person is standing, so that they can just survive to get off the movie.
It's even before that, because if you think this is going to kill me, like the monster is going to get me, the killer is going to get me, or whatever, you say, I'm going to grab the last survivor token. So now I am the last survivor. And so you get the token, you hold on to that, and you have all the XP that goes with that. You can only spend that XP on saving yourself. Now, you also have the option of, like if I was running a game with Bruce and Monty, and Bruce is the last survivor and Monty's about to die, Bruce is like, okay, I'm going to pass the last survivor over to Monty. And so now Monte immediately inherits all the XP that goes with the last survivor. And Monte gets the benefit of last survivor. But it also means that Bruce can never be last survivor again.
So he basically sacrifices himself to save his friend.
Well, he doesn't necessarily die. He's still there, but it just means he's now protected by the last survivor.
Well,
and he can never be last survivor again. And so eventually you get to the point where, like, you may have passed the last survivor just out of the game. Like, the last survivor is like, I don't have any, like, you can always give the GM, it's like, if you're the last person, be like, all right, GM, I have no XP. I'm going to give up last survivor just to get an XP or roll something, which means last survivor's out of the game and anything goes. Anybody could be up for grabs. So, like, all these forward tropes that have appeared in movies and TV stuff, I try to get rules for them as a module that you could plug into your campaign one at a time, multiple at a time, just to kind of get that sort of feel of it. There's a thing that I've called the secret twist cards, which is just a bunch of cards that have pre-printed information on them, and all of them kind of acts like a cipher. It's like, yeah, I give you this card, and it says, nothing to worry about. If you turn in this card, you can use it as a reroll. And there are a lot of cards like that. And the idea is that the GM can hand out a card to everybody, and everybody's like, oh, cool, I get a free reroll. It's like an XP. But one person in the group says, you're actually possessed by the demon. Don't tell.
So it's sort of like
the witch game or whatever.
Betrayal at the House on the Hill.
Yeah.
Sure. Or the Battlestar Galactica game.
Yeah.
It's just like,
you're a Cylon.
So
That's
all
awesome.
of that sort of stuff is in the game. And a lot of that stuff is very rules neutral. You could probably just pick that up and use it in any setting at all.
So I just want to stop for 1 second. We are doing this in front of a live Twitch audience. Our Twitch audience has actually tossed us a couple of questions already.
Mm-hmm.
Bring it on.
So the looks like Lord Wraith.
Yeah, it looks like
my screen's tiny.
I know, I'm having a hard time reading it too.
Wants to know, can we play characters other than vampires in the Stay Alive sourcebook? So are there monster PCs in there?
So 2/3 of Stay Alive is about running or playing in a horror game. And whether that's you're doing fantasy horror or gothic horror or modern horror or whatever. So you could just be playing elves and dwarves and then you have a horror scenario, or a Call of Cthulhu thing, or you could put something like Alien where you're in space. The last third of it is a mini campaign setting called Masters of the Night. And in Masters of the Night, plug your ears if you're thinking about playing this because there are some spoilers here.
La.
In Masters of the Night, your characters like wake up in a room and you're like, we feel really weird. And there's a note that's been left there for you that says, hey, my name is so-and-so. I have turned you all into vampires. You all work for me now. I've had to leave town. You need to run my criminal operation while I'm gone. I'll be back. Don't betray me. By the way, the people outside this room are going to try and kill you. You should kill them first.
And
so you
no
deal with
pressure
that.
or anything.
You take over this person's criminal enterprise. And so you're playing this little mini campaign where all of the earlier vampires are gone. And so suddenly you're like, I'm a vampire, and we're like, in something like Vampire the Masquerade, you play a vampire who's on the low ring of the totem pole. In this, like, there are no other vampires. So yes, you're a brand new vampire, but you're the top of the food chain. And there are other vampire gangs trying to control different bits of crime in the city, but it's a different sort of dynamic. But yes, you are playing vampire PCs in that, and there are a whole bunch of different, options for like, oh, I want to learn how to blend in with shadows, or I want to grow bat wings and that sort of thing. We didn't want to make this the comprehensive, here's how to play monsters of everything as PCs, but the Cypher system is flexible enough that you could easily just start slapping on some of their abilities to characters. Like really for vampires, what I did was, here's an ability that lets you drain blood and feed. Here's an ability that makes you look kind of, weirdly dead. And here's another thing that makes you, they're called, in the general Cypher system rulebook, you get power shifts if you're a superhero character. For the vampire setting, you get blood shifts. And basically, once you become a vampire, you get 3 automatic levels of effort that you can put into anything you want. You divide it up. You'll be like, oh yeah, I'm really good with attacks, or I'm really good with stealth, or I'm really good with this particular attack, or might defense, or whatever. it's just taking existing abilities that we already have rules for working and saying these are thematically appropriate for vampire PCs. You could easily do the same thing and say, hey, we're going to have a game where everybody's playing a mummy, and you're going to have this ageless ability, and you're going to be able to, you're not going to breathe. Maybe you can curse people, or we're going to play as revenants or like Frankenstein's monster, and you're going to say like, oh, you've got a vulnerability to fire, but you're resistant to electricity. So you can easily build that sort of thing. But the focus of the book in terms of what you're playing as a monstrous PC is the vampires.
It's funny. I actually just made up a couple of characters that I essentially had to create my own foci for, because we're going to be playing a game at the end of the month, and everybody's a ghost. So cool. Some of the players who don't know how to make characters came to me with some ideas, and I was like, sure, we can do that. But one of the things I decided is, because they're ghosts in a modern setting, that they effectively they don't really have armor, but because they're ghosts and they're mostly incorporeal, they effectively have armor against corporeal creatures, so that they don't take as much damage. They're harder to hit, but against one another, they're on the same plane. So it's more of that transition between being dead and being alive that gives them protection. So it's kind of like armor, but really not. But that's a good mechanic, I thought.
Yeah, no, yeah, it totally works. I was going to add one follow-up comment to what Lord Ireth asked about. Because when we ran the playtest of this at MCG, we have our summit where we, like once or twice a year, we all get together in person. And so I had Shauna and Bear and Darcy as my players. And the first thing that they asked when they read the letter was, well, do we know that vampires are real? Like in game, do those characters know? And I'm like, as far as you know, vampires are just fictional. So they're like, okay, do we know that any other sort of monsters are real? And it's like, as far as you know, they're fictional. But there's a bit in the book that talks about if you want to, you could run a game kind of like the World of Darkness, where yes, these PCs are vampires and there are werewolves. But as regular people, you probably haven't run into them. And there are ghosts, and there are the created, and there are all of these things. Like you could add all that stuff in. It's very, very broad for that. But the focus for this is vampires, because as it is, it takes up a third of the book, and I didn't want to take up half the book with vampire stuff. That would be...
But vampires are cool, man. So what
That's
else?
awesome.
It is awesome. I haven't had it.
I wasn't certain. I haven't been able to keep up with all the things that everybody is.
You guys keep
right
releasing
now.
a ton of stuff, which is great, but it makes it really hard to keep up with.
Yeah, we are just so busy writing stuff. It's crazy.
You guys keep putting out the actual products, and I missed the updates because I got my CSR out in my front of me, going, "That's new and cool." And new, so I haven't managed to keep up with the. I didn't realize that we had an actual explanation of the setting that was in Stay Alive yet. So that's awesome.
I was gonna say, what else have we got here? His handwriting's so small.
So how do you go about setting the mood when you were running? I mean, you were obviously running horror for playtesting. How do you go about setting the mood at the table?
So we actually talk about that in the book. There's just advice for the GM on like setting up the environment, and there's advice for the players saying, hey, you know what, you might be inclined to make jokes and funny little comments and things like that, or be distracted by your phone. And playing in a horror game requires a higher level of commitment to keeping that atmosphere as a player and as a GM. And I have a black cat who has just jumped up, and I'm going to move him down. So there's some general advice about keeping the mood of the gaming room set for that. There's also some specific advice for each of those genres. So it says, hey, if you're running a game about ghosts, you could do this thing and that thing. If you're running a game with scary clowns, like there's a lot of ways that you can have like a little scary clown puppet, peeking over the GM screen. If you have, some skill with Photoshop, you could actually make custom character sheets that have like little clown faces hidden in them. You're like, oh, why is a clown face? So just little ways that you can just like keep reinforcing the creepiness of things. A lot of it is controlling lighting and with music and scent. And of course, there's always hey, make sure that you don't have anybody who's allergic to this and that sort of thing. It's just about keeping that environment of horror. Monty runs a really, really good horror game. We just wrapped up our last Invisible Sun narrative that was going on for 2 years. It was actually originally our original Invisible Sun playtest, and then it became our just home game. But there's this thing in Invisible Sun where there's this house, this haunted house called the Dark House, and everybody who goes in, nobody ever comes out. And the neighborhood people are like, you're not allowed in there. Like, you're not even allowed to go near the place because you're just assumed to be dead. No one has ever come out. Well, last year for Halloween and the year before that for Halloween, our group ended up in the Dark House. And we managed to get out, but like Monty scared the hell out of us for different things. He just like weird visceral descriptions of things. He turned the lighting down. He had some subtle music. There was a bit where this creepy sort of witch person was like crying in the corner, and we weren't sure if this was like a person we should be talking to or helping. And Monty had these like gloves that had like big pointy witchy fingers on, but he just slipped them on under the table so we could see that. And then so we kind of approached this witch person, which I think at the time we just thought they were an old woman trapped in the Dark House, another Vizsla like us. And he says, and then she turns around and there's like hands right in the face. It's just about like that sort of upset where you are keeping the players a little jumpy, and that helps them enjoy the, yes, my character is scared because I'm feeling little surges of adrenaline now too.
Speaking of things, you can't see it, but somebody just followed us, and now we have a zombie walking across our screen. Thank you. I don't know who that was. It just popped up.
Yep.
We're being followed.
Unfortunately, for those of in the chat audience, in order to keep Sean from flickering funny, he has to basically be the front of my screen, so I really can't see
what's going
on the.
And then Sean pulls that kind of stuff. Thanks,
That's
Sean.
Awesome. Actually, I kind of like that one. So we can't see everything.
Actually, yep, I still can't see it because my phone's we're using an awful lot of bandwidth tonight.
Yeah.
Well, I can see the Twitch chats. If people have questions, then I can just take over and read them off and answer them.
Well,
maybe I'll just make up my own.
I have the chat so I can see it. I just can't see. So
we can't see part of
I had to layer 3 different windows, so that we could see everything.
I'm tired of your excuses. I want big chat text. Wait, Monica's getting a signal from the mothership.
It's playing through something. Oh.
We are getting the signal from the mothership.
So I started hearing other voices in our basement.
Well,
and our kids are upstairs.
They were us.
Well, I couldn't tell that with these big headphones on. And our kids are upstairs, and they typically are pretty quiet when we record and broadcast because they know. All of a sudden, I hear these people talking.
We're talking about horror
in the room, and there's these strange voices. Well, we have a Bluetooth speaker down here, and apparently it connected to Andrew's phone, and it started playing our show with seconds behind us. So.
So that's actually a good example. There's a part of the book that talks about misleads or red herrings, where you set up players so that they think something is going to be a scary element, and then it's not. And so you have these rising beats and you have these falling beats, and so you kind of get them anticipating. Like, one of the things is, if the characters know, or they believe that there is like a chainsaw murderer out, killing people, you can use like a soundboard app on your phone, just like now and then play a chainsaw sound. And then when the players go investigate, they're like, oh, and they get all their weapons ready, and they're like, use all their combat ciphers. And then it's just some guy cutting the logs like, what are you folks doing out here? They're like, oh, and they're all just amped up. And then like, okay, and then they turn around, and that's when you hit him with the actual chainsaw killer.
Yep.
Why are you out here cutting the grass at 3:00 in the morning, dude?
I'm too drunk during the day to do it. So one thing that we're introducing because of the CSR is this thing called Cypher Shorts. And these are not a article of clothing. They are basically just a super simplified version of the Cypher System rules that is meant so that you can just sit down and play a game as a one shot, and you can make characters very quickly. And the Cypher Shorts rules are probably like 6, 8 pages. But Stay Alive, all 4 of our genre books, Bruce's The Stars Are Fire, My Stay Alive, Shauna's We're All Mad Here, and Monty's Godforsaken, are all going to include some Cypher shorts that aren't related to our mini setting. So my Cypher shorts aren't about the vampire setting, but I've got a Cypher short is just 2 pages, but that includes character creation and then the general plot. They work kind of like the instant adventures, and that there are keys and like key bits that happen.
Is this what we did at Gen Con though?
Yes.
Did that video ever get posted? You know what? I didn't actually know
it has
that.
Not posted yet. I want to get it done up before Halloween.
Okay, cool.
Have that. Yeah. So the book has one that is you're entering a haunted house, which is actually not what we did at Gen Con. There's one where there's a kids camp in a national forest, and there's an axe murderer chasing these kids,
Of course.
teenagers. And the third one is a zombie outbreak in a hospital. And I was talking about misleads, and I got to this. I have lost my train of thought because you're talking about 7 or 18 different things. Right. So we play tested the axe killer in the woods sort of thing, and it was at night, and the axe killer is out there, and the lights have been cut on the generator, the generator's been cut, and so the PCs, Monty, Shauna, and Bruce, have gathered up at the campfire where everybody was making s'mores and stuff, and they hear somebody like approaching from them, and they're like teenage kids, right? So they're like, "Oh, this is really scary!" And somebody runs up into the firelight, and it's Joe, who's one of the camp counselors. Oh, it's just Joe. And then like the very next round, the axe killer comes out and just murders Joe with one hit. And they're like, so it's just that the tension rising, and they're like, oh, it's just Joe. And then you immediately just spike that tension again. And so it's just all about, there's a section talking about just maintaining those beats and when you need to have, because you can't just keep amping up the tension over and over again because people just get burned out. You got to go and get them tense, get them excited, and then go, and that's actually a good place for comic relief, where you can make a joke or something funny happens, and that sort of thing. But then you got to start building up that escalation again. And so yeah, that's all aspects of getting the mood and maintaining it.
So do you use the horror progression then, where like you start
horror
mode? Horror mode. I couldn't remember.
Yes, and that's where the GM intrusions start happening on numbers other than just one. You could, becomes 1 or 2, 1 or 3, 1 or 4. It can eventually get really, really high. And the section that talks about maintaining those beats actually says, oh, and when you have like a downbeat that's like calming, that's actually a good opportunity to reset the horror intrusion range.
Okay. I have a quick, there are 2 questions, but the first one's a lot more serious than the second. Burst of Hope says that, what is your ideal number of sessions for a horror campaign? And then I'll ask you the second question when you're done.
Okay. A lot of people will be fine with doing I think a lot of people can handle doing a one shot of horror, even if it's like a 6 or 8 hour game. It's just like, okay, no, we're going to have a scary thing happen. Especially if it's like around Halloween, you get all your stuff and you can get focused on that. For an ongoing campaign, you could.
Oh no, you've cut out. Oh no, Sean.
All right.
Well, hold on, everyone. We'll be right back.
It just kind of resets at the end, and after.
All right.
Hey, Sean.
And nobody ever mentions. Yeah, remember that.
Sean, you locked up. We missed your entire answer.
Oh no. Okay, well let me go back. Oh, you know what? It's probably because of this guy who jumped up on my lap again.
That black cat.
What was the last thing I said?
You said a 6 to 8 hour game might be okay if it's a one shot, and then you.
Okay. So 6 hour game, good. Might be good for one shot. People can maintain the horror and their fear for that long. You could also have a horror episode that is a one-off part of your existing campaign that is not normally a horror campaign. In the same way that you could have a TV show that suddenly has a horror episode and real creepy stuff happens. And at the end of that episode, you can actually even reset back to normal. Like there are many TV shows that are like, oh, something scary happens and someone acted weird. And then the very next episode, no one ever mentions, yeah, remember when Ross got possessed by the devil? If you're wanting to, like, sometimes a horror mini episode or a mini episode group, you could have maybe like 2 or 3. It depends on how often your group meets. If it's every couple of weeks, it's hard to maintain that from session to session. I get very excited and I tend to speak faster, and then my speech gets messed up because I'm a little hyper that way. And then there's also a horror campaign, and that takes a lot of dedication to stick to it, because you're thinking, okay, every week I gotta get rid of my baggage from my daily life and focus on, the horror. It might have ended on a really scary note, or it might have ended on a regular note, and that's why I think horror campaigns are hard to do. They're a lot easier to do as a one-off or as a, just a couple of sessions where you can as a convention sort of game. But longer than that, it's hard. But I mean, there are people who have been running, ongoing Call of Cthulhu games for, many sessions, a year's worth of real-time sessions. Because it's Call of Cthulhu, it's probably because they have some investigators dying and new ones coming in, because your longevity in Call of Cthulhu is not great.
No, it's not. It is really not.
So this,
go ahead. I'm a fan of doing the shorter batches of horror, because I think once you start to stretch it out too far, it stops being horror.
And it's a grind.
It doesn't necessarily become a grind, but sometimes you'll end up with something that's more like action adventure with horror trappings.
Sure.
Because
actually that's something I mentioned in the book, because you can kind of become numb to the fact that, yes, we're now in a horror, like a zombie apocalypse situation. It's just like, oh, if there's no end to the zombie apocalypse, then it's just a matter of attrition. Mm-hmm. Eventually, your character is going to die or leave the game. And it's often good for the GM to come up with a way to wrap up that campaign and say, yes, oh, you've come upon the cure, or you're going to have some go out in a blaze of glory thing. Because otherwise, you just end up like, oh, here's this new weird random ass confrontation. Here's this other conflict that's going to be on. That's why I stopped watching The Walking Dead, actually, because I'm like, oh, it's another group of humans. Yes, I get it that The Walking Dead is about the fact that the living humans are The Walking Dead. They just happen to be in the world of zombies and blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, I didn't want to watch different conflicts with human groups. I can see that in just about any show. I wanted to see people fighting zombies.
That's kind of why we stopped watching it too, because it was basically a soap opera with zombie background.
Yeah, and that's fine. Dark Shadows is all about horror, and it's a soap opera. But if I want to see Rick walking around and shooting zombies and Michonne chopping off their heads with her katana, that's what I want to see. I don't be like, oh, should we punish people who murder humans? Yeah, they're impacting your survival. Stop being stupid. It's the
there's a card for that.
4 choices.
4 choices.
All right, next question.
So the second question, I'm going to add a caveat. As a trained healthcare professional who has had to perform the Heimlich maneuver on people, I cannot strongly recommend enough not trying this at home. However, Burst of Hope would like to know, how many dice sets can you fit into your mouth?
So that's kind of a trick question. Yes. Because a dice set is really such a variable term. Like if you're talking Numenera, you've got percentile dice, a d20 and a d6. You're playing something like Vampire, dice set is what, 5d10. So in D&D, you're going to have 4, 6, 8, 12, and 20 and a 10 for percentiles. So there's a lot of variability in that. But to come close to actually answering the question, I have a big mouth. And
don't do this. Don't do this at home.
I cram a lot of these dice in my mouth all at once. And this is probably, I don't know, I could probably fit 50 dice in my mouth at once. I'm not going to try it though because
Yeah, please don't.
Yeah, please don't. We don't want to see. We are not dealing with that over the internet. So it's a big deal with Johnny Bench could put 5 baseballs in his bare hand, but now I'm thinking 50 dice and chunking Reynolds' mouth. That might be a better. It might be even more impressive.
Well, maybe we'll have a Gen Con challenge. I'll cram a bunch of dice in my mouth, and people will put in a raffle thing where they can guess how many dice I managed to cram in my mouth.
Maybe we should make sure that they're a little bit safer and get like chocolate dice.
No, you're still anything that does not instantly dissolve is a terrible idea.
The answer would be infinite. Be like, wow, we're able to keep cramming dice. Wow. Weird. Marshmallow dice, cheese dice, they're all just disappearing.
Here, let me move my mouth. Let me move them around to make more room.
I started working. It's great. This is a delicious challenge.
I figured you could cheat that way.
You could cheat that way, but yeah, no. Don't put dice in your mouth. And don't leave 4 D4s on the floor. That just, rules of thumb. Are we...
Well, I was going to say, so we were talking a little bit about some of the inspiration and things and earlier. And you said that you've got movies in your in the book, but if you had to pick 3 movies that you would recommend in any genre, any genre, subgenre of horror, what would those 3 be?
Wow. Okay. So that's interesting because my roommate and I have decided we're going to watch, as we did last year, we're going to watch a horror movie on Halloween. And each of us is going to bring to the table 3 nominations, what we would like to watch. She's much more of a classic horror film. So she'd be like the original Dracula and Phantasm, that sort of thing. And I'm trying to think of something more modern, just because I know that she hasn't seen a lot of these new ones. But I think I would put Let Me In or Let the Right One In, whichever version you like. The Thing with Kurt Russell. And there's another one that I had. If we're going to go body horror, I would probably say The Fly with Jeff Goldblum.
Good choices.
Those are...
But if we were just picking one per genre, I might say, let's go for something like an Americanized J-horror and watch Ring, The Ring or Ringu. If you want to watch a ghost story, I'd say watch The Others.
I like that one too.
What about demons? I might say Fallen.
Oh, yes.
Bill Washington.
Yes. That is one of my all-time favorites.
And then, of course, if you're going to say aliens, then, of course, Alien and Aliens.
Right. Although Aliens is sort of what I was talking about earlier with the you get a little burned out on the horror part and you end up in action adventure because Alien I would say is horror. Aliens is an action adventure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, it's like how Terminator and Terminator 2, like Terminator is very much like the monster is stalking you. Right. And Terminator 2 is, no, we're going to gun up and we're going to take out this guy. It's a different sort of feel. It's just a slight pivot from that. And that's actually the neat thing about horror is that you can add horror to anything. Mm-hmm. The book talks about that. It's like, I'm looking for some weird thing and I want to surprise my players. Well, you could just take an existing adventure and ramp up the horror. You could take anything. And like, I'm going to do a show or an episode of my game that's based on the TV show Friends, but I'm going to add a horror element.
Yeah, they call it Scooby-Doo.
Scooby-Doo. You can have scary cartoons, scary My Little Pony. You can have high school angst with horror. That's Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yes.
Alien is just the monster. It's sci-fi plus horror. You can add it to anything.
So one of our regular viewers, Terry, just pointed out that that it's the 40th anniversary of Alien, and that they're going to do a special release in the theater for a couple days for Alien on the big screen. I may have to go on Friday.
Figure out if that's something I can catch.
That would be awesome. It's one of my favorite films.
Yeah, horror, not horror, whatever. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah,
and it's got a cat.
And it does have a cat.
And then it, while we're talking recommendations, I'm going to throw one back out at for a more Hitchcock-like horror. Have you seen the movie? The psychological horror. Have you seen the movie Arlington Road from the
I
early
have not.
90s? You should.
I have not. I've heard of it. Yeah.
It's good, and it is probably. I'm not a huge fan of like the slasher horrors. I grew up in the same time period you did, and I just couldn't get over people making really stupid mistakes. It it, it just bugged me horribly. So I never became a huge fan of the genre. But I did grow up on things like Hitchcock and other things with like the more psychological horror, and that's where I tend to go. That and like sci-fi horror and things. But I highly recommend Arlington Road. It was one of those movies that I didn't know what I was getting in for, and it creeped me out. Something fierce.
So I really like psychological horror too. I'm not a big gore and guts and that. So like I remember seeing like Freddy. I was born the same year you were. I mean, so we grew up in very much the same time period. Yeah, I remember going and seeing Freddy Krueger and Nightmare on Elm Street and all those things. But I'm actually going to recommend a movie that was recommended to me by Ryan Costello, and it's called Final Girls. Do you know which one that is?
I do.
Okay. And I think that one's really fun because, like you said, it kind of makes fun of the slasher summer camp films, but then it also has sort of like your soul survivor concept is part of the movie. But then it also just has a really neat sentimental story to it, which makes the horror both really good and really scary. And it was... And there was a great setup for a sequel. Because if you can't have a sequel, what's the point?
Yeah, right. You need a franchise for its horror. You mentioned that it's making fun of the horror genre. That actually reminds me that there is a subgenre of horror called comedy horror. And that's where you just are kind of like amping up the camp a little bit. And that's where you get stuff like Evil Dead 2. And the Scary Movie franchise and Tucker and Dale versus Evil.
Oh, we love that film so much.
And it's just really fun to be like, yeah, you know what? We are going to go all in on all the crazy tropes of this. Like, yes, this is the axe killer chops off your arm, and yet you're still alive and you're mad and you're still fighting. And so that is not necessarily the death of your character. Just your character is missing an arm for the rest of that session.
But if you can get a chainsaw for that arm, that makes you pretty tough.
Yes. Someone in the chat mentioned The Hitcher.
Oh my God, that movie is so scary.
Yeah, that was intense. That's one of those ones where it's just like he was such an intense actor, and there's nothing supernatural about him. He's just this ruthless person. Just watch The Hitcher. It's good. I'm sure we could probably spend an hour just saying, "Oh, let's."
And this is a really good horror film too. Yeah, Cabin in the Woods. So I mentioned this last week, but I'll mention it again. Someone was, people who don't like people doing stupid things. Cabin in the Woods. I didn't realize at first that it was a satirical look at comedy, comedic look at horror. And we're watching it, and I'm like, this is the worst horror film ever. And Andrew's like, they're making fun of the horror genre, honey. I'm like, this is the best horror film ever. Because I actually didn't even like it. I didn't know anything about it other than it was a horror film. I didn't know what the premise is. I try to go into all movies as blind as I possibly can so that I can experience them without any expectations and preconceived notions. I was like, this movie is bad. They're making all these awful choices. And well, that was the whole point.
It wasn't even well done. It was just,
it was so bad. And then he's like, they're making fun of it. I'm like, this is a hilarious ass movie.
I was the same way with Evil Dead 2. I was 16 or 17, and my girlfriend and I were going to watch a horror movie on Halloween, and we went to the video store, and we were going to get Evil Dead. But they were out of Evil Dead. We were like, oh, well, here's Evil Dead 2. And they're like, yeah, you don't need to watch the first one. So we were like, okay, we go put this in the VCR. And we're like, this is crazy. Because it's basically Sam Raimi remaking his own movie, but making it funnier. Like, okay, but this totally works. And that is what, made the icon that is Bruce Campbell now.
Yep.
Yes.
One of the things I talk about in the book is, hey, you know what? it's okay to base a horror session on a movie or horror movie or horror TV show that you like, because you can say, yeah, that happened. You are the sequel.
That's a good idea.
That is a good idea.
That is a really good idea. You guys are going to have to play summer camp kids. Just kidding. In a hospital. Well, and you know, it's funny because I first saw Evil Dead when I was in college, and because I hadn't, you know, and we actually watched them back to back. So I had the you know, luck or, you know, the opportunity to see the original one with the cast of college kids, literally, you know, filming a school project, and then seeing the updated. And I actually really liked the original better. I mean, I like the second one. I mean, there's nothing funnier than Bruce Campbell in the second one, but that first one actually is more, I don't want to say more honest, but it's definitely a different film. And I really liked it there. It had more of that like ensemble feel because it was like a summer camp movie, and it was more just like a series of really bad choices in the second one with this one man. Like he couldn't have had worse luck.
Yes. Like that's the thing about horror too, is like bad stuff happens to people. And so sometimes, yeah, bad stuff's just gonna happen to your character, and your character might die, or you might lose an arm or get a chainsaw hand, or you just gotta roll with it because the other option is to give up.
So I have one final question, I think, because we're getting on 10 o'clock. And it's one that I should have asked earlier. How would you recommend handling PC deaths in a one-off like your last survivor game, so that they're not just sitting around doing nothing for the rest of the session?
So the character posse option is one thing that I mentioned. It's like, yeah, your main character dies, have them bring in it like, oh, there's Timmy from the camp had been hiding under the car this entire time. He's okay. You know, we thought you were dead. No, I'm fine. That sort of thing. Another option, another rules module I have in the book is called Ghostly Allies or something like that, where the idea is that even though your character has died, you still have your subtle ciphers and your XP, and you can spend your subtle ciphers and XP on helping out the remaining living characters. So that makes you still engage in what's going on.
I've seen that somewhere. Awesome. I think I've seen that somewhere else. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not a great idea. I want to say that was that a mechanic in another somewhere, or am I just?
I mean, it could be just even something like Conan the Barbarian, where he gets knocked down and you think he's going to get killed, and then all of a sudden Valeria, his Valkyrie warrior, shows up as in her full-on Valkyrie mode.
Yeah.
Kills him and says, "Do you want to live forever?" And then she vanishes. That's a perfect example of some random ass supernatural thing. Like, I was not expecting that. I thought I was going to die, but someone who has passed on is looking out for me.
Yeah. So you basically end up with an entire ghost posse then.
At least for the rest.
And the illustration we have for the last survivor is great. We've got like a soccer mom, and she's just got like a black eye, and she's holding like a crowbar. She's like, "Oh, I'm so mad." Karen wants her latte.
I love the art, and the Monte Cook Games books. Some of them are so amazing, and actually, I'm rather glad to see them come back when you update with the books and stuff like that. Because I was going through the most recent Cypher edition upgrade, whatever, and the little guy, the little mad scientist with his little potion with the baby dragon in it or whatever. So I can't wait to see the art.
Yes.
Bear has he sent out a couple of sets of sketches to the design team last week for Stay Alive for us to review, and they are so good. I mean, so we have learned that when we have specific things like, hey, we need this monster to be illustrated, it needs to look like this because it has this role in an adventure. But a lot of times, is like, especially for this book, is we have probably 10 or 15 illustrations where we just say, Bear, we need scary stuff to be filler art for whatever section needs. If we have a page that's short by half a page worth of text, just put a piece of scary art there. And so Bear knows that he has this, team of artists, and it's just like, you are really good at scary stuff. You are good at scary stuff. Just make me some scary art. And we're like, these are great. These are great. Oh, this is wonderful. There's just like such good, I was so excited to see all this stuff appearing in sketch form and looking forward to seeing the final version. There's like just some new creatures and just one of the fun things is that the vampire setting at the end, not only so you have your own PC characters, and we have like some pre-gen vampires too that'll be available as a free PDF. But there are all the other newbie vampires that are also running gangs in the city. And so there are like 20 different other named vampires in the setting that you can use, and a bunch of them get illustrated. But they're just like people from all walks of life. So it's like, oh, this is a guy who is like a bike messenger who's now a vampire. And here's the soccer mom who's a vampire. And here's like the crazy homeless preacher who's a vampire. And here's the teenage goth girl who's a vampire. So you're just seeing all these
Never saw
depictions.
that one coming.
Yeah. There's actually one of the rival vampire gangs is called the Cult, and they're all in like all the vampire mythology, and like, yes, we're scary.
Oh no, we lost Sean again.
Stuff. Yeah, we're like the Hells Angels.
Well, we are now past 10 o'clock, and we don't want to necessarily keep you from whatever that you would be doing tonight, because it's much earlier your time than it is our time.
Yeah, you don't know how jealous we are. The sun's still shining where you're at. Of course, we don't get up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
So just want to double check, make sure there aren't.
I don't think there are any
questions.
other questions.
So with that,
So when can we expect copies of our book?
So The Stars Are Fire is coming out in November, and we have these setups that they are every 3 months. So that would be February, which happens to be my birth month. So happy birthday to me. I'll get my horror book.
Ooh, very
That's
exciting.
really soon.
Yes, it is. Sadly, it is not soon enough. I am running horror at the end of this month.
Well, you could run more in February.
I
to honor
could.
me.
I
we
could.
will.
Oh, we will. It's going to be a comedic horror. So
Nice.
It's Scooby-Doo level horror for this one.
our son is actually going to play in it. He's actually the inspiration. So I'm real excited, but we didn't want to talk about it too much until after we had you on, because when we'll have some announcements for that as well.
Right.
Cool.
So, thank you again, Sean, for coming out and joining us on the stream.
Thank you.
This was awesome.
Yeah,
I really had a good time. We could be here for hours.
We could. I love talking to Sean.
Yeah.
So we can find you over at Monte Cook Games on like everything, and then you do your own stuff. And
yeah, but I'm mostly focusing on MCG stuff just because there's only so much time in the day that I can devote to writing, and I need to like do other fun things like watch movies and play with my cats and go on dates with my girlfriend and
sleep
stuff.
and eat.
Sleep and eat, those are optional. Yeah, but I'm slowly working on getting the last of my side projects wrapped up, so I will no longer feel guilt about them.
Well, that's cool. It happens, when you have the opportunity to write such great stuff with a great company like Monte Cook Games. It's sort of hard to say, hey, I'm just gonna put this on the back burner while I go finish this other stuff, and because it is definitely challenging. But
I'm really lucky, and like it's really great to be able to work from home and write stuff that I want to write, and I have just such great coworkers who also happen to be friends of mine. I've known Monty and Bruce for 22 years, and Shauna for like 7 years now, and Charles and Tammy for like 15, and Bear and I have only known each other since I joined MCG 3 years ago. But Bear is also great, and I've known Darcy for a couple of years. It's just they're all people who I would be happy to game with, happy to hang out with. It's just we're a really tight crew. We love what we're doing, and I think it shows.
I was going to say it definitely shows in the products and the presence that everybody has as a company. I've never heard any complaints, and really, as part of the asset team, which is where we really started to become kind of friends through that. it's an experience to really be able to be part of making other people happy and bringing joy and excitement to their lives and stuff like that. So thank you for doing that for us. I really appreciate it.
So, like the asset team is really important. Like I used to be in charge of the asset team when I started at MCG. Like I know the value of having people who are out there, you know, in the game stores running games, whether those are comedy games or horror games or sci-fi or whatever. It's just like you allow us to run games in person. I mean, obviously, I couldn't be in 300 different game stores a year.
Why not?
The team. There's the sleeping eating thing.
Oh, okay, that's right. There's that whole sleeping
Never
eating
mind
thing.
the writing thing.
Well, you know, I mean, he has nights.
He's a vampire, right?
He's a vampire. We've established that now. He's the goth chick. So,
we can find you at MCG. Is there anywhere else that you would direct people to find more about what you do?
I occasionally post on my Sean K. Reynolds game designer page on Facebook, and I tweet more often from my Twitter, which is Sean K. Reynolds.
all right.
And
Do you have a Patreon?
No.
Nope. Okay. Just making sure we don't shout out everything.
No, I appreciate that. No, just my job is for where that energy goes.
Okay. Well, then, thank you very much, Sean K. Reynolds, for being our guest again. You can come be on our show anytime.
anytime.
So I'm Monica Marlowe.
I'm Andrew Marlowe.
And are we gonna make my announcement?
No. Well, so we've talked about where you can find Sean.
Oh, we have to talk about where you can find us.
Right.
See, we're terrible at this.
We're Marlowe House Games, and you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, all under
Marlowe House.
Our Gmail is
marlowehousegames@gmail.com.
Right. And we also have a Patreon because you were talking Patreons, so,
which is
how we're able to put together videos like this and do the blogging that we do. So,
yes, we blog every Wednesday, and it's free. You don't have to be a backer to read our blog. There was a little bit of a snafu last week, and it looked like you did, but
it was a glitch.
It was a glitch. So if you would like to read our blogs, they are available for free. You don't have to back us, but we would appreciate it if you did, so that we can have it on our show.
We all float down here, Richie.
And with that, this has been Insights and Inspirations with special guest Sean K. Reynolds. I'm Andrew Marlowe.
Monica Marlowe, have a great night, and don't forget to ask for consent.